welcome to this episode of the Your Day, Your Rules podcast. I'm Michael.
And I'm Sev, and you're about to listen to some provocative chat about the frustrations many of us feel at work.
Offering practical tips to reach your authentic potential and insights gained from our professional experience.
Whatever your background, come and join us at a secret water cooler conversation.
Let's begin.
So the way that we're brought up, the family dynamic that we come from, the socioeconomic conditions that we are born into and grow up with, the kind of person that we end up becoming in terms of our, sexual orientation, maybe even faced with disabilities and things like that, all of those factors that make us something that's outside of the default, they really do have a certain impact on us as beings and the way that we're wired and the way that we render the world. So we then take those things and we sort of have them as a backpack of sorts that we take into the workplace, and it impacts our behaviors. So Michael, tell us a little bit about your background and how you entered your world when you were starting out, going into school and the workplace.
Well, so in many ways, my story is one of the immigrant rags to riches tale, but interwoven with a few nightmares that you might not see in the Hollywood movies. My dad came to England in the mid 1970s to further his engineering degree and his experience in engineering. And after a couple of years, he asked my mum and my sister and I to come over. So I was born in Sri Lanka, which sometimes people can find that a bit, oh, that's strange. I vividly remember somebody saying, "Oh, I thought you were born here. You don't have an accent or anything."
No.
And so like, oh, okay, thanks, I think. But my parents were fairly well educated. My mum had an economics degree. My dad had an engineering degree. But coming to England in the 1970s, it was a completely different place. It was a very different place to what it is now. So they faced real struggles, real hardships. There were instances of them applying for jobs which they were more than well suited for, which they were turned away from on the basis of you're overqualified, or we don't need this person, or we don't need a person of your type, which are very sort of loaded responses. And in the background, there's always, okay, we don't fit here, we don't belong. So what happened with my parents is my dad took on manual work. My mum was a machinist in a sewing factory, and life was really tough for a long time. And my parents always wanted better for their children. And that was a lot of the driving force behind them coming to England. It was, we want a better life for our children. And the way we're going to do that is by providing them with the access to a first-class education, or the best education that we know in our ability we can get them. And that will open the doors that were closed to us. And so for us as children, what it did is to justify the sacrifice, and we saw it. Even though our parents might not have imposed it on us, we absorbed.
You felt it.
On a very core, deep level, we felt their struggle. And to justify that, it was, I have to do as well as I can academically, and I have to reach as far as I can. It created this real sense of drive and purpose, which is a great thing. But on the flip side of that was, failure is not an option. We have to succeed.
That's a lot to kind of bear and live by, isn't it?
It is. And so for me, I created my idea of who I was. It's like, I have to be smart. And I looked at the funny kids at school and I thought, well, they're the ones who are really accepted, or they're the ones that are popular within the group. So I have to be funny. And if I have those two things going for me, then things are going to turn out well.
That was your label of survival, was it?
It was. And it felt like we were constantly under siege. I don't know, Sev, is that a similar experience that you had in terms of growing up?
It's quite interesting. So I am a originally Turkish heritage person, but was born and grew up in Australia. And my parents are not the typical Turkish parents that you would expect.
Right.
My mum is probably the biggest rebel that I know, and my dad is probably the biggest dreamer that I know. So I was fortunate enough to have parents who sort of said, "Go after it. If you dream it, you can have it. You just need to work hard for it."
Yeah.
I wished at some point someone had told them that you should work smart for it rather than hard for
Yeah,
it, and that would have
exactly.
really helped me. But I was really fortunate in that because my mum was kind of like, rules are there to be broken. And she just
Amazing.
had this fierce sort of drive where she had 3 words to her vocabulary moving to Australia in the '60s, and it was literally, "I am job." Actually, it's funny whenever we watch Mrs. Doubtfire and he kind of goes around saying, "I am job" to try and get the interview. It's quite hilarious. If for the younger listeners out there, you've got to check out Mrs. Doubtfire because it's definitely a classic. Um, but my mum did that, and my dad was sort of, he had a high school education and went to an art school where he learned how to do cabinet making and carvery essentially. So he's a bit of an artist. Um, and they went there with $2 to their name, with a two-year-old on her hip at the age of 19, she was. And I think for me, seeing their bravery in uncharted waters and the action that they took, even though they came up against struggles, was amazing. And it gave me that can-do mentality of
Yeah.
whatever it is, I'm just going to give it a crack.
Yeah.
And I'm going to fail, and I'm going to fail over and over again until I figure this out. So I was really lucky in that aspect. But the thing for me was that sense of belonging was missing no matter what, because of my rebellious parents who weren't traditionally Turkish or
Yeah.
fit the mold. Um, I didn't belong to the Turkish community necessarily. I didn't feel accepted. And at the same time, my Australian community and where we lived made it very, very known to me at the time that I wasn't really welcome, and it wasn't.
So you fell between two worlds.
I did, and it was almost like, even though my internal motor was saying, "Absolutely, you belong. You go, girl. You go and do this." The external world just kept beating me down,
Yeah.
and at some point, it seeps in, and at some point, you sort of, I remember having moments where I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, "What is this?" I just felt like, you know, black and white. I was so different from one angle to the next. I was so confident in some ways and so lacking in others, and just had absolute, scarcity mentality of,
Yeah.
I'm never gonna be enough.
Yeah.
No matter what I do, I'm never gonna be able to punch through this. And yeah, that was pretty tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very similar to kind of the experience that I felt in terms of this lack. Um, and it's not something that you chose, it's not something I chose, but it's something that seeped into our consciousness and
Yeah.
helped define this concept of who we were. And when you're quite young, unless you're very self-aware, you just accept that concept that you have of yourself is correct.
Yeah.
Whereas if you looked at it, or took a step back and actively chose what your self concept was, then the suffering that you experience, or the suffering that I experienced, may have been lessened.
I would
But
completely agree with that.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing, um, what you want and being very clear about your values and belief systems is so important. But
yeah,
at that young, impressionable age, when you're still sort of walking around on the planet thinking that everybody's out to do you good and help you out and whatnot, rose petal glasses,
yeah,
you do think, you do second guess yourself, and you do wonder if you do belong. But then one of the biggest questions is, well, what is belonging, and who are you trying to fit in with actually? And
yeah,
there really isn't an answer to that, is there? Because it's different whatever situation you find yourself in. There's a
yeah,
different set of rules.
yeah,
But I think the moment arrives when you think, well, it's about my belief system and what I want for
yeah,
myself.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing is, and also for me, that my fundamental values haven't changed over time. But my idea of who I am and what I can be and what I'm here for has changed. And it's no more legitimate or no less legitimate, for the simple reason that you are many different things during your life and they're all true. But the mental framework you give yourself can dictate what happens. and your ability to change, your ability to adapt. And I think over time, what happens is if your self concept, if your this is who I am, becomes very fixed, then what will happen is life will send you things your way that totally contradict that. So you will try and order your external world in a certain way to protect that sense of who you are. But eventually, I think because life is such a powerful force, it will break through your defenses. And then you have a crisis. And then you have those questions: who am I? What have I done? Have I completely wasted all of this time in my life? Have I gone down the wrong road? But what's happened is your self concept hasn't kept up with your reality changing. And I think if you can keep up with that, if you can keep yourself open to change and your idea of who you are open to that, then what it does is it relieves that suffering. It relieves that tension or that battlefield in your mind. Because I think like, life and work can be a very uncomfortable places to be, especially when the things that you are doing at work come into conflict with this internal idea of who you are. And you can see a lot of people who struggle with that and think, "Oh, I can only be this thing." So when they're given something new, or they have to sort of think about a move into a different area, it throws them for a loop because they're really clinging on tightly to this idea of I am this thing
Yeah, you
rather
have
than I
to.
can change.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, isn't it? As we grow through life, we are changing. So we need to be able to be flexible to keep up with who we're becoming and what the world is becoming and the new roles we're fulfilling and all of that sort of stuff. I think, and especially in the workplace when you're, assuming your first position, you can't know everything. You don't know what you don't know. So you can't be beating yourself about it. You need to be kind to yourself and to
Yeah,
grow with it. And I
absolutely.
completely resonate with what you said earlier about, picking up on certain norms, I suppose, of
Mhm.
what is acceptable in that particular scenario when you are either at university or in a club or at work for the first time. You pick up on those um, behavioral norms and what is acceptable. And you start trying to mirror them to try and
Yeah,
feel that sense of belonging.
yeah,
And I think that's acceptable to a certain point because you do want to be part of a community and be part of a group and be a team player. And I think to be a team player, you all do need to sort of bond together. But it's when you start tipping the scales the other way, where you start becoming a sort of permeable membrane of yourself where you don't really exist as an individual
yeah,
anymore. You've just become that social community or that workplace community that you find yourself in.
yeah,
And I don't know about you, but I think because my younger self was lacking in some ways in terms of I can actually just be me and be accepted for being me, and I will deliver upon my creative genius as
yeah,
well
yeah,
because I am me rather than just being average like everybody else.
yeah.
Well, not average like everybody else, but that came out completely wrong. But being like everybody else means that you don't stand out because you're not distinctive and you've robbed yourself of that.
Yeah,
So, if you want to blend in because you want to fit in, that's fine. But that is going to rob you at some point of being able to stick your head out and shine. And the managers at the top and the leaders at the top might be looking for someone that's going to be interesting and who shines.
yeah,
So
yeah,
manage those scales very well in terms of, yeah, you got to fit in, but at the same time, you can't lose yourself to that sea
yeah,
of everybody else.
yeah. I completely agree with you. It's just how far do you absorb other people's ideas, other people's dreams, other people's way of representing the world or rendering the world, and how much do you drive that forward as you as an authentic individual? And that could be a very difficult thing, and particularly when you're in like a fairly junior position.
And with a scarcity mentality as a
Yeah,
starting point.
exactly. Yeah, with that framework of I have to be successful, and the way I'm successful is by mimicking the people who are at the top because that's the way the company is structured. That's the ladder. And to get to the top, you have to be like those people. So, what your uniqueness or your particular way of seeing the world might not be the company's way. And if it's not the company's way, then you have to give it up, because if you don't have an inclusive culture, it won't be celebrated. It'll be seen as something as vaguely suspicious.
You can't force it.
Yeah, or you're the troublemaker, or you're the, you're the annoying one who keeps questioning why we do things a certain way when we've always done it this way. And then I think at some point, I think most people have to play the game, because unless you're in a relatively secure financial position from the get go, the cost of doing that, the cost of standing out, it can be potentially quite high.
Yeah, you
Uh,
wanna just keep your head down and get on with it.
yeah,
I don't know about you, but that was definitely so as much as my parents were relics from the
yeah,
beginning,
yeah,
they were, keep your head down and just get on with it
yeah,
sort of thing, because, I don't know, maybe it's a cultural, uh, maybe it's a cultural aspect, maybe it's the experiences that they were faced with when they entered upon, a new country, but it was and just to be able to survive, but it was definitely one of the mantras that we had growing
yeah.
up in our household.
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you draw attention to yourself and you're in an environment which can be very hostile, the outcome of that is, well, something bad's going to happen. You're you're going to be, I don't know, singled out, or you have no right to express your dissatisfaction, because you should just be happy that you're here
Yeah,
and that you've been given this opportunity. And I am very grateful that I was given an opportunity, but doesn't mean you have to give up aspects of your humanity and your human experience, and who you are, as the payoff for that.
absolutely, and I mean, you and I are touching on notes around belonging and fitting in and giving up sort of self-identity as it comes to cultural aspects or race, etc. But this also touches a huge variety of other things, right? It's
Mm.
about your gender. It can be about um,
Sexual orientation. Yeah,
exactly. It can be so many different things. Even age is a factor that
that's
I've
a
seen
huge
play in
huge
this.
issue now.
Um, but I think on the positive side, the sort of things that we've sort of experienced and faced ourselves, I'm living in hope that, our kids, for instance, things are starting to change with some of the, global movements that have been happening in the last few years, etc. So, like you say, it was like, be grateful that you're here and you have a seat.
Yeah,
Whereas I'm hoping now that we can move that along where, organizations and leaders will embrace diversity and inclusion and equity and, try and have a look at, am I actually making the right decision here, or in practicing certain decisions that
yeah,
I'm doing. And also on the flip side, as an individual, if you are starting out from a scarcity mindset, hopefully with that sort of support and training that you now see in some organizations, it will give you some comfort that you can be a bit more you. You
yeah,
can bring a bit more flavor of yourself
yeah,
into the workplace.
yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I think also the forces of change are irresistible, for the simple reason the world is more global, the world is more connected, and cultural sensitivities are going to come to the fore much more often. And if you are equipped to deal with that, if you are empathetic, and if you can gel with lots of different cultures, then I think you will have an advantage in the world of work in the future. And it would be great if organizations could be more open to it. But I think, as a safety measure, having a stock take, or looking at the where you are objectively, sort of aligning that with what your mindset is, and then changing the aspects of your mindset which are relics from the past that but don't serve you now. I think doing that on a regular basis is a good practice to get into, because it will no doubt help you to sort of navigate your career, and also give you a sense of sort of grounding in yourself, so that no matter what the external world throws at you, you are very centered.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more actually. I think taking stock and just asking yourself if where you are today, and is it truly what you believe? Is it um is there truth in it, or is it just a story that you've been telling yourself? Is it the narrative you've been telling yourself in your internal talk? Is it what your parents have lovingly parted onto you, or something that you've absorbed from the environment? We were talking about it seeping in. I think to really do a sort of take a moment and really have a think about whether or not, check out the data. Is there truth in what you're actually feeling and taking into the workplace, or into life with you? Is there a reason to be feeling like you don't have enough, or you're not enough, or there isn't enough? You know, I think that's really, really important to sort of reflect upon and see how much of that is you. How much of it do you really
Absolutely.
believe versus what you've been either told or what you keep repeating to yourself? Because those internal conversations that we have is effectively what our belief system becomes. It's, everything that we're exposed to and everything that we let into our brains becomes part of what we believe. But if what you're telling yourself isn't correct in the data, then, if there isn't truth in it, if you're not being objective about it, then why are you taking it on board? Because
Yeah.
pull those weeds out,
Yeah.
go to your garden, pull those
Yeah.
weeds out. Um, and I think what we were saying before really struck a chord with me as well. Is, what do I actually want, and why do I really want it? What is it about that? Having a sort of sense of purpose, or that kind of feeling towards a goal that you're walking towards, is so important, especially as
Yeah.
when you're younger, because everything else can start clouding your judgment. And the whole scenario of trying to fit in or appease somebody or be a people pleaser because you feel
Yeah.
like you're going
Yeah.
to disappoint somebody, and then you're going to actually suffer as a result of not hitting those notes, um being the goody two shoes, essentially. It's good to a point, but then you have to actually reflect and say, I've done enough
Yeah.
and I've brought my best self here. And you can only really do that if you have the confidence to do that, because you're relying upon your belief system that you think that you are enough, or that you have done enough, or you are deserving of being here. So I think you need to do that, but you need to know what you want as a goal as
Yeah.
well.
Awesome.
Um, and then, you know what? We've talked about the asking for help thing. I don't know what it is about this, but for some reason or another, when you come from a place where you've seen your parents struggle and it was almost like a weakness to ask for help. We don't ask for help. I had such a terrible time in the past where I should have just asked for help.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you look around you, the people who are successful, they've had help, they've had mentors, they've
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
friends and communities and
Networks and collaborate.
networks.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's really important that we sort of think about, what do I want? How can I achieve this? And actually, who can help me?
Yeah.
Who is out there?
100%. 100%. Okay, I think unfortunately we're out of time for this episode, but in the next episode, I think we'll look at how that mindset that was created in or as a result of our experiences in childhood impacted on the early stages of our career and the lessons we learned going forwards, which helped
Yeah.
us overcome those challenges.
I can't wait for that one. The conformity and masking is definitely something that I used to be quite proud and say that I had more masks than the Mad Hatter had hats, quite frankly. But I don't know
Fantastic.
how that panned out. But anyway, we'll see you next
See you
time.
next time.
You've been listening to the Your Day, Your Rules podcast with Sev and Michael.
Before we go, we'd like to say a big thank you to all of our listeners and for sharing our content with someone who needs it.
Keep spreading the word and remember to like, subscribe and follow us here and on our socials.
Until next time, if you want to go fast, go alone.
If you want to go far, go together.